AIDS and HIV requires balanced discussion, and in fact that is a comment made by one of the contributors to the program. But the one thing this program certainly lacked was balanced. Now it could be argued that balance was being achieved by assuming that everybody else had heard the conventional view and here was the alternative view, but clearly an individual watching this program might easily be confused into thinking that the rather plausibly expressed arguments had some sort of scientific validity. There's no question that this program and the hypotheses presented in it are flawed scientifically. They have been already rejected on the basis of existing data. And many of them have been rejected many years ago within the history of the AIDS epidemic. There are quite extraordinary lapses of logical thought, which is really surprising.
Well, perhaps we can pick up some of those.
And we can pick up those
when we go into your detailed criticism. But before we do that, Joan, why did you make this program? What was the justification for it?
I thought there was a great need, and not only I, because I am a journalist, right? I reflect the views of scientists, and there was a great need to do this. 2 years ago, we made a program called AIDS: The Unheard Voices, which was produced and directed by Judd Adams, and there was quite a sort of silence after it. It put forward the fact that HIV cannot cause AIDS. Now there was a silence. Medical journalists didn't dare touch it. Now, 2 years later, we have made a program which takes the whole thesis even further and argues that AIDS cannot be caught, is not an infectious disease. I am absolutely delighted that Dr. Pinching has wanted to come on this program, because at last we have some debate. The debate is opening up. And the call from scientists around the world to open up the debate about HIV has been very strong. We have a Nobel Prize-winning scientist on the film, Professor Walter Gilbert. We had Professor Montagnier saying we are still at the beginning of AIDS research and understanding AIDS. How can we feel confident that we have cracked it, that we know exactly how AIDS is caused? We can't. We need to debate, and that's why we're here.
Right, let's do that right now and perhaps pick up. There are two main arguments that this program put. The first, and let's deal with that now, is that HIV does not lead to AIDS. Why do you think that that was wrong?
Well, I think that the first thing to do is to look at some of the arguments put forward. One of the key arguments made by Professor Duisberg is that viruses act fast or not at all. How he can say that is quite bizarre, because we already have many virus infections which cause chronic disease. There are many examples. Hepatitis viruses, many of the herpes viruses cause disease after long periods of infection.
So you're saying that was simply wrong?
So, I mean, it simply ignores existing data on other viruses. Indeed, some of the retroviruses that he himself has worked on cause chronic disease. So he starts out with a clear statement that viruses can only work this way, which is not verified.
Could you give me an example of one of the retroviruses you referred to there?
Well, some of the animal retroviruses can cause, first of all, tumours in animals, but may also cause immune deficiency disease. These are already described before AIDS emerged. So I think that we first of all have to undermine the suggestion that he makes that viruses can't cause chronic disease.
Okay, let's deal with that then. Professor Duisberg is wrong.
Well, first of all, we won't talk about animals, because AIDS has never, ever been induced in an animal. HIV has not ever caused AIDS in an animal. However, on the point about the viruses that Dr. Pinching is talking about, there are, I believe, certain viruses that, can recur. The point about them is that they cause the disease. Syphilis causes syphilis. Herpes causes herpes. HIV does not cause AIDS. You cannot actually say that HIV causes AIDS. It is a dormant retrovirus that cannot become pathogenic. Well, it only invades 1 in 400 cells.
Okay, well, I think let's take those arguments, because these are made in the program. To say that it cannot sets the ground rules before you look at the data, and that's typical of this program. Why don't we start to look at the data? Take, for example, the question as to whether the virus can infect the relevant type of cells. The figures quoted are quoted in a highly misleading way. We know that in the tissue culture situation, many of experiments have shown that the virus is capable of getting into the vast majority of the T4, T helper cell population, which is the primary target of the virus.
Only 1 in 400 at most.
No, in the tissue culture situation...
But that's not in the human, that's on the bench.
If you can allow me to finish the sentence.
All right.
In that situation, we show that it is possible to infect those cells, but they, when they are infected, clearly are destined to die rapidly. Now, if you have the situation where cells die as a result of the infection, they will no longer be present for you to demonstrate that there is infection or not in them. Now, if you take the situation of human beings at any stage of AIDS or HIV disease, it is clear that the number of cells that are still floating around the circulation that have the virus in are very small. But what is not made clear by the program is the fact that the number of these cells is gradually reducing over time, and people with AIDS have grossly reduced numbers of these cells. So clearly they must have gone somewhere, and it is not unreasonable to presume that the ones that have gone as a result of having been infected, a condition which we know can occur in the test tube.
Dr. Pinching, neither you nor I are virologists, okay? Dr. Montagnier, indeed Professor Montagnier, who discovered HIV, said twice to me in the last 2 months that he has now realized that HIV cannot in itself and alone cause AIDS. You also know that we have never found any evidence of an explosion of T cells being killed in the body. You can do what you like on the laboratory bench. You can mix potions and make HIV do what you like, but in the body it has never been seen.
Well, let us just for this moment, because we put a couple of questions to Professor Montagnier. We, for instance, said what is his view of Professor Duesberg's theory that HIV is not the cause of AIDS. We also asked him, does he still believe that HIV is the main cause of AIDS? And we asked him whether he believed that research on HIV offers the most hope for a cure for AIDS. This is what he said in reply. My view is just opposite that of Dr. Duesberg. Whereas he claims that AIDS is not an infectious disease, I am assuming that AIDS is caused by HIV helped by another infectious cofactor. Therefore, research on HIV and its cofactors is essential for finding a cure for AIDS. He opposes the view of Duesberg.
Indeed, he always has.
But you're using him to support your argument.
No, Professor Montagnier has always said that he was looking for an infectious cofactor, and we said that in the film. In fact, he wanted us to tell the world that he has found 2 or 3 or various mycoplasmas, which he's going to announce, maybe if he goes to the San Francisco conference. I'm not sure whether the French doctors are going to go in the end, because of the discrimination based on HIV positivity. He has always said that there's an infectious element, and to say that our film was entirely unbalanced is ridiculous, because we put Professor Montagnier's view.
His view was not put there
it was in the film.
No, it was not. It was not put there as an opposing view.
Oh,
it was used to support your argument.
No, I'm sorry. Halfway through the film, Brian, there is a quote from Montagnier in which we introduce him as saying that he believes that there is an infectious element in AIDS and in HIV. Now, you've probably only remembered the little bit at the beginning, where we used his quote to say, I don't believe that HIV in itself can induce AIDS. Later on, there is a whole section on mycoplasmas, and I spoke to him only the other day, and he said he was happy that we had included that section.
Well, I mean, I think it is very clear that the way it was presented and the way it was seen by many people was that this was in the context of a program that's saying that HIV did not cause AIDS. How the producer can now say that she agreed with Montagnier saying that HIV did cause AIDS and the cofactors were appropriate without including that in the debate is far from clear. But I think we should move to some of the other clear misrepresentations of the facts. Many studies around the world, including ones that I have conducted over the last 8 years, have demonstrated that if you follow groups of individuals at risk for AIDS, as we defined them back in '82 before HIV was heard or thought of, it was very clear that people who were well could be followed over time, and some of them went on to develop AIDS and some did not. Now, during the course of those studies, we and others have demonstrated that some had HIV infection and some did not. Now, to quote the figures from our own study, which is just representative of very many studies, we had over 300 patients in our original series. Of those, 170 were positive for HIV and 144 were negative. None of the negative individuals many of whom shared the sexual behavior, the drug exposure, and all the other comments made about alternatives, hypotheses. None of those seronegative individuals developed AIDS over the 8-year follow-up. And over 50% of those who were positive did. Now, I feel that those sorts of arguments are crucial in the assessment of the proposition made by Duisberg and others, and they were totally ignored. I think it is clear that if you place the argument as your program did, that HIV positive individuals don't always have AIDS, if you accept, as is accepted by 99% of the world at the very least, that chronic virus infections occur and that HIV and AIDS are linked and that HIV is a chronic virus infection leading to AIDS, then clearly at any time there will be people who have HIV and are well. Secondly, if you take the proposition that there are people with AIDS, or with what seems to be AIDS, and find that they have no HIV, you then have to analyse how frequently that occurs. In this country, it is less than 0.1% of cases. Now let's define why there is a problem there.
Come in now,
yes, we're going to hear more from Joan.
Otherwise, you know, that can go on and on and on. First of all, we have never argued that HIV wasn't infectious. HIV is infectious. It is a dormant retrovirus. You can catch it. And if you have multiple partners, and maybe up to 1,000 even, which occurs at times, and if you're so-called in the marketplace, you're going to get HIV. It doesn't surprise me in the least
that is not the argument that I've placed.
That half of your patients with AIDS, and I'm really sorry to hear that anyone has AIDS, and I know you're a very caring doctor and you see what's going on every day of your life. Now, it doesn't surprise me in the least that half of your patients who have got ill are HIV positive, because HIV is quite easily found as a marker of risk behavior. Now, can I just ask you a question? You say that you have asked all your patients...
I want to leave that question for a moment.
I want to ask about risk behavior.
Well, we will get on to that. There's the whole question of infection is what we need to get on to shortly. We will have to take a break there. We'll be back in just a few moments to continue this discussion. Tonight on Right to Reply, we're discussing last Wednesday's Dispatches programme, The AIDS Catch. With me, Dr. Anthony Pinching, and the programme's producer, Joan Shenton. Now, the second major point made by this programme, and the second major point of Professor Duisberg, was that AIDS is not infectious. Would you address that point to Joan Shenton?
Well, several statements are very misleading. First of all, it is suggested that it is not behaving like an infectious disease. If we turn the clock back to before HIV was identified, scientists at that time were analysing the many possible theories about the emergence of AIDS, the disease. And the theories of malnutrition, drug intoxication, multiple sexual partners had all by that time already been rejected as being inconsistent with the factual evidence of the way in which AIDS as a disease was spreading.
So does that mean that what he's now saying is out of date and shouldn't be given the respect it apparently was?
Well, indeed. I mean, it's like turning the clock back. It is clear that if you look at the spread of AIDS as a disease, even if you don't accept HIV as the cause, then it is behaving as an infectious disease. First of all, from a handful of cases in 1980 through to 200,000, well over 200,000 documented cases in 1990. I mean, if that isn't spreading fast, I'm not quite sure what is. If you look at the way it is spreading in different countries of the world, it behaves in a manner exactly like you would anticipate and have documented for other sexually transmitted and blood-borne infections.
So the message of the programme would have serious implications for particularly those people with AIDS, and certainly those working with the sufferers of AIDS.
Indeed. I mean, I think the programme is misleading and confusing for the whole population, because those who are as yet unaffected personally by HIV or by AIDS may think that this is some sort of excuse to abandon all the reasonable arguments that they have had so far. And the lack of any countervailing debate was of serious concern.
Well, we get back, Joan, to the accusation which was voiced earlier, the irresponsible nature of it.
Do you know, this, I think, is the first time that a debate like this has occurred about AIDS on British television.
Well, let's move on to it then.
I must say that it is very, very confusing to us, in the general public, journalists as well, when the scientific establishment starts making assertions about what causes AIDS and what doesn't. And I give you one example of how the whole AIDS edifice is crumbling. Kaposi sarcoma, which was considered the cornerstone of the way AIDS was diagnosed, right? Kaposi sarcoma, now in New York, when we went there, is being found in many, many AIDS patients, in many patients who are immune suppressed and who think they have AIDS and they have no HIV at all.
Is that right,
How
Doctor?
can you answer that?
Well,
no HIV at all.
Is that right?
There is no great surprise in that, and this is understood well before the AIDS epidemic emerged, that Kaposi sarcoma, like the many opportunist infections that occur, is a reflection of a person whose immune system is disordered. It doesn't tell you why the immune system is disordered. It is simply a reflection of vulnerability.
But does that,
And
does that actually get rid of what has been the thinking about AIDS and HIV?
Yeah.
Not in the least. Kaposi sarcoma has always occurred. It was described in the last century. It is a condition which occurs in many patterns of immune suppression, and it cannot be used in isolation as a basis for diagnosis, nor do we use it so.
But the Center for Disease Control says that Kaposi sarcoma is a way of diagnosing AIDS. Now that they're finding it without HIV, Dr. Friedman Keene in New York said he is going to ask for KS, as it's called, to be taken off the list of AIDS diseases. That is how people are moving the goalposts.
No, I think we're simply in adjusting epidemiological definitions.
I love it.
No, adjusting
But isn't that necessary?
epidemiological...
If you're actually trying to find out something, then this business about moving the goalposts, I mean that sounds like a pejorative way of saying that you have to adjust your thinking according to the information you're uncovering.
We don't know what is true.
This is complete
we do
nonsense.
not know. AIDS is listed as 25 different diseases, and when HIV is present, it's called AIDS. When HIV isn't there, it's called the old disease. We really don't know where we are, and thousands of hours of television have gone by, and we put one program out which challenges the HIV
that
hypothesis.
one program is what we've been discussing, and I want to ask you finally, because this is your last word, Dr. Pinching, whether this has actually shed any light on the confusion that Joan Shenton talked about.
Well, sadly, the program has only caused confusion. If Joan Shenton or her colleagues were confused, perhaps they could have avoided creating confusion amongst so many other people by coming to ask some of the people who hold the so-called conventional view before they made their program. It is quite clear that the debate has been conducted in the scientific press and has been properly debated, and Peter Duisberg and his colleagues have had their arguments well assessed and overturned by proper scientific debate.
Not overturned.
Sorry, Joan, it's the last word from
I think it is very clear that this was poor quality television because it lacked balance. It is extremely poor science because it ignores most of the data.
Well, Joan Shenton, thank you very much indeed for talking about your program, and thank you, Dr. Anthony Pinching. If you would like to confront a television producer with your criticism of a program, then get in touch with us at 60 Charlotte Street in London, W1P2AX. You can call us on 071 631 4444. Your call will be taken by our answer machine over the weekend. If necessary, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. You can, of course, come into one of the video boxes. They're in Belfast, Glasgow, Gateshead, Bradford, Oxford, Taunton or London. Details are, of course, in the TV Times. That's all from Right to Reply for this week. Until the same time next week, good night.
If you're worried about AIDS or HIV, you can call the National AIDS Helpline on 0800 567 123 and talk to a trained advisor. Your call is free and confidential.